My name is Isabella Moore. I'm 27 years old, and this is my true story, one that still keeps me awake at night. It's about how my family's darkest secrets came back to haunt us, quite literally. I'll tell you just enough here so you understand why you need to listen until the very end. 3 years ago, I inherited my grandmother's old Victorian house in Maine. I thought it was just an old property with creaky floors and dusty rooms, but I was wrong. The house held grudges, generational grudges, and it wanted me to pay for something I didn't even do before. I tell you everything. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share this story so you never miss what comes next. This story is written and edited by Dark Life Side Diaries. It was the day after my grandmother's funeral when I first stepped inside the house. She had left me a towering Victorian structure that looked like it belonged in a Gothic painting, its tall windows glinting coldly in the winter sun and the air around it heavy with the kind of silence that makes you feel watched. I had always known Grandma Agnes to be a strange woman, fiercely private with eyes that seemed to know more than she ever said, but nothing prepared me for how the house itself seemed to breathe when I pushed open the door, the stale scent of mothballs and old wood hitting me like a wave, and somewhere deep inside, the faintest sound of shuffling feet, even though I was alone, or at least I thought I was, because, you see, my parents had refused to visit this place for decades, claiming it brought bad luck, a term they tossed around casually but avoided explaining, and I, being the stubborn daughter I was, had always chalked it up to family drama until I saw the first thing that made my skin crawl: a portrait hanging in the hallway, its colors faded but the subject's face hauntingly vivid, a man in a black suit with sharp, hawk-like features and eyes that seemed to follow me, his painted gaze shifting ever so slightly when I moved, as if tracking my every step, and beside it a brass plaque engraved with the name Elliot Moore, 1884 to 1912, a name I had never heard before, though the last name Moore clearly tied him to me. Later that evening, while unpacking, I found an old wooden box under my bed, sealed with a small rusted lock that looked fragile enough to snap, and curiosity got the better of me, so I forced it open with a screwdriver, revealing bundles of yellowed letters tied with black ribbon, each addressed to Agnes, in a shaky hand, and as I unfolded the first one, the smell of mildew and something sour filled my nose. The ink almost faded but still legible. They must all pay blood for blood. You will help me, Agnes. There was no signature, but the looping script looked eerily similar to the name on the plaque, and even as I sat there absorbing those words, the temperature in the room dropped sharply enough to make me see my own breath, and in that cold, I heard it, someone whispering my name in a voice I didn't recognize, low and rasping right by my ear, though. When I spun around, the room was empty, the door still shut. That night I tried to sleep, but the sound of footsteps in the hallway kept waking me, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing, and once, I swear, I saw a shadow pass under my door, stopping for several seconds before moving on. But when I worked up the courage to yank it open, the hall was dark, and still the portrait of Elliot barely visible in the moonlight, yet I could swear his painted lips were curling into a faint smile, and that was the moment I realized I wasn't just living in my grandmother's house. I had stepped into the middle of something my family had tried to escape for generations, something that wasn't ready to let me go. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the lace curtains, casting strange patterns across the floor that looked almost like skeletal hands reaching for me, and though I tried to shake off the events of the previous night as exhaustion or an overactive imagination, a deep unease clung to me, especially when I noticed something that hadn't been there before: a single muddy footprint at the foot of my bed, too large to be mine and pointing inward, as if whoever left it had been standing there watching me sleep. I searched the entire house from attic to cellar, each step accompanied by the groan of old floorboards, and while the air upstairs was heavy and stale, the basement felt different. Damp, almost suffocating, with a faint metallic smell that made my stomach churn, and in the far corner, behind a stack of rotting crates, I found a door I'd never noticed the night before, its surface scarred as if something had scratched at it for years, deep gouges running vertically like claw marks, and when I touched the knob, it was icy cold, despite the rest of the room being warm, so cold that my fingers ached instantly, but when I tried to turn it, it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, I went back upstairs, only to find one of the letters I'd left on my dresser now lying open on my pillow, and the words I'd read the night before, "They must all pay blood for blood," were underlined in fresh wet ink, even though I had no pen that looked like the one used, and my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. That afternoon I called my mother, determined to demand answers, but the moment I mentioned Elliot Moore, she went silent, and after a long pause her voice trembled. As she said, "Isabella, listen to me, leave that house now." When I pressed her for details, she whispered, "He wasn't supposed to be there anymore. We buried him far away for a reason," before abruptly hanging up, leaving me staring at the phone in confusion and dread. That night, the pacing in the hallway returned, only this time it didn't stay in the hall around midnight. The sound of footsteps entered my room, slow and deliberate, and I could feel the mattress sink slightly at the edge, as if someone invisible had sat down the weight real enough to make me gasp. I froze, unable to move, and in the darkness a faint outline began to form, a tall, gaunt figure in a black suit with eyes like hollow pits, his mouth twisting into an unnatural grin, and though I tried to scream, no sound came out, my throat tight with terror, until he leaned close enough for me to smell the stale, earthy scent of soil and whispered, "You carry their blood," before vanishing as suddenly as he appeared. Shaking, I turned on every light in the house and stayed awake until dawn, and that's when I decided to dig deeper into who Elliot Moore really was, so I went to the local historical society the next day, where an elderly archivist named Mrs. Callahan gave me a thin file with his name on it, her hands trembling slightly as she handed it over, muttering, "That family curse should have died decades ago." Inside the file, I found a brutal newspaper clipping from 1912, the headline reading, "Local man found dead in family home, suspected murder," and the article described how Elliot had been found at the bottom of the basement stairs, his neck broken after a heated argument with his two brothers over matters of inheritance. But no one had ever been arrested. As I read, my stomach tightened, because the two brothers' names matched those of my great-great-grandfather and his younger brother, meaning my bloodline was directly connected to his death. And in the margin of the article, in handwriting eerily similar to the letters I'd found, were the words, "They lied, Agnes knows." The realization hit me that my grandmother must have been aware of all of this, and possibly had some role in keeping Elliot's spirit bound to the house, maybe even intentionally, and the thought sent a chill down my spine. When I returned home, the locked basement door was standing wide open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond, and though every instinct screamed at me to run, something deeper, maybe morbid curiosity, maybe something else, pulled me toward it, because part of me already knew that stepping through that doorway was the only way to get answers, even if it meant coming face to face with whatever had been pacing my halls. The moment I crossed the threshold into that hidden basement room, the air became so thick and heavy it felt like wading through water. Each breath shallow and labored, the scent of damp stone and something foul like decayed meat curling into my nostrils, and though the dim glow from my phone's flashlight cut through some of the darkness, it seemed to shrink the deeper I went, as if the shadows were swallowing the light, feeding on it. The floor was uneven, jagged in places, and every step I took sent echoes bouncing off the walls, echoes that didn't quite match my movements, almost like someone was following just half a step behind, pausing when I paused, moving when I moved, and the further in I went, the more I noticed strange markings carved into the stone, circles, jagged lines, and what looked like crude drawings of people hanging from trees, their faces scratched out entirely. In the center of the room sat an old wooden chair, its backrest splintered with rusty chains bolted into the ground on either side, as if someone had been restrained here long ago, and on the seat lay another bundle of letters tied with the same black ribbon as before, though these were stained with dark blotches that looked disturbingly like dried blood. I hesitated before touching them, but curiosity won again, and as I untied the ribbon, the top letter slipped free, the ink faded, yet still readable. "They will never escape me," Agnes promised. "She knows what they did. She knows I will not." Forgive, my stomach turned, but before I could read further, the temperature plummeted, my breath fogging instantly, and from the farthest corner of the room came the sound of slow, deliberate breathing, deep and rattling, followed by a low, guttural laugh that crawled over my skin. I spun the light toward the sound, and that's when I saw him. Elliot, his face pale and stretched, unnaturally, eyes sunken so deep they were nothing but darkness, his suit tattered, dirt clinging to the fabric as if he had clawed his way out of the ground, and in his hand he held what looked like an old pocket watch, swinging it slowly, the ticking echoing unnaturally loud in the confined space. "She kept me here," he said in a voice that seemed to come from all directions, "but you will finish it." And before I could respond, the watch stopped ticking, the silence in the room so absolute it felt deafening, and in that instant the walls themselves seemed to close and the carvings glowing faintly red like embers, and the floor beneath the chair split open just enough for me to see what was inside: bones. Human bones piled together in a tangled mass, some small enough to belong to children. My vision blurred as nausea rose, and when I staggered back, my heel caught on something soft. I looked down to see a length of rotting rope frayed at the ends, wrapped loosely around the remains of another body. This one still wearing a torn dress that even in its ruined state I recognized from an old photograph of my grandmother as a young woman, which made no sense because she had died and been buried miles away. Panic surged and I scrambled for the door, but Elliot was suddenly there in front of it, blocking my path, his grin widening unnaturally as his voice pressed into my head rather than my ears. "They killed me for greed, Isabella. Now it's your turn to pay." And in a flash I saw visions that weren't mine, two men, my great-great-grandfather among them, shoving Elliot down the stairs, his neck snapping on the stone, and my grandmother young and trembling, swearing she would keep him so he wouldn't take the rest of the family, performing some kind of ritual with candles and blood that bound him to this place. But the binding had weakened, and now he was free to choose a new target. My pulse roared in my ears as I shoved past him, feeling his icy hand graze my arm like a burn made of frost, and I bolted up the stairs 2 at a time, slamming the basement door shut behind me, only to hear his laughter follow me into the hallway, low and certain, as if he knew I wouldn't get far, because deep down I already understood Elliot wasn't trapped in the basement anymore, and no matter where I went in that house he would be there. For the next 2 nights I barely slept, every creak in the floorboards, every groan of the wind against the windows making me jolt awake, half expecting to see Elliot's shadow looming at the foot of my bed again. And though I tried to convince myself to leave, something stronger than fear rooted me there, an invisible thread pulling me deeper into the house's grip, as if the walls themselves whispered to me when I was half asleep. By the 3rd night I stopped trying to fight the pull and started searching for anything that could explain how to break whatever curse bound Elliot to my family, poring over the remaining letters, piecing together fragments of his rage and betrayal, and one letter in particular stood out. It was addressed not to Agnes, but to whoever carries the blood, and it read, "When the chain breaks, the last shall stand in my place or fall beneath me," the meaning unclear but heavy with menace. My research led me to an old journal tucked behind a false panel in the upstairs hallway, the pages yellow and fragile, written in my grandmother's unmistakable hand, and in it she confessed to what she had done, that she had bound Elliot to the house in exchange for sparing her immediate family. But the ritual came with a cost. When the binding weakened, the spirit would seek out the last living heir to claim their life unless it was willingly given to him by another blood relative. Reading those words made my stomach knot, because I was the last living Moore by blood. My parents had passed away in a car accident years earlier, and that meant Elliot's vengeance would end with me. I thought about running, but the journal warned that leaving the house would only hasten the spirit's claim, and a part of me already knew he would follow wherever I went, so I decided to face him on my terms. That night I lit the same kind of black candles my grandmother described, arranging them in a circle in the parlor, the smell of burnt wax mingling with the damp air as the temperature dropped and the shadows began to pulse, shifting unnaturally against the walls until Elliot stepped into the flickering light, his form more solid than ever, his eyes 2 bottomless voids that swallowed the flame's glow. And I told him I understood, that I knew what my family had done, and that I was ready to end it. He tilted his head, smiling in that cold, predatory way, and said, "Then give me what is mine," stepping forward until his hand was inches from my chest. And in that moment an image flashed in my mind, my grandmother, younger but still stern, watching from the shadows, her eyes filled not with guilt but with determination, as if she had planned for this all along. And I realized she had set me up to be the final payment. Rage burned through my fear, and instead of stepping into his grasp, I grabbed the pocket watch he always carried, now hanging from his waistcoat, and smashed it against the floor, the glass shattering gears scattering across the rug. And the moment it broke, Elliot let out a scream so piercing it rattled the windows, his body twisting violently as if being pulled apart by invisible hooks, the shadows around him writhing and recoiling, until with one final flash of blinding light he was gone. The candles snuffed out, instantly plunging the room into silence and darkness, and for a moment I thought it was over, until I heard it, faint but unmistakable, the sound of ticking coming from somewhere inside the walls, slow and steady, as if the watch was still counting down. I left the house at dawn, the cold morning air biting at my skin, and drove until the old Victorian was nothing but a memory in my rearview mirror. But even now, weeks later, in the quiet of my apartment, I sometimes hear that same ticking at night, growing louder when I try to ignore it, and I can't help but wonder if Elliot is truly gone, or if he's just waiting for the right moment to finish what he started. And deep down I already know the answer. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. this story if you want more chilling tales like this.